I don't want to represent, Spike and I were best buddies or anything, but I definitely watched his career. I'd met with he and Rick Howard and his partners, Megan, in the skate business a couple of times. And I just seen like, hey, there's an avenue here. I'd written a couple of scripts and sent them to him, and he'd sent notes back and, hey man, I dig where you're at with these. And so a lot of encouragement. And so I just kind of started jumping into directing music videos. Sony in the UK said to me, hey, we've got a couple of bands. Can you come to England?
Welcome to Behind the Stays, a podcast that shares the stories behind your favorite boutique hotels, short-term rentals, and hospitality brands, and the hosts, operators, and entrepreneurs who've brought them to life. Every Tuesday and Friday, you'll meet the military veterans, the retired flight attendants, the tech entrepreneurs, the school teachers, the single moms, the hoteliers, and real estate investors who are all, in their own unique ways, shaping the future of travel and hospitality. Discover how these visionaries from all over the world have built stunning landscape hotels in the mountains, designed bohemian bungalows on the beach, erected eclectic, off-grid, nature-immersed escapes, and so much more. Behind the Stays is brought to you by Journey, a first-of-its-kind loyalty program that brings together an alliance of the world's top independently owned and operated stays and allows travelers to earn points and perks on boutique hotels, vacation rentals, tree houses, ski chalets, glamping experiences, and so much more. And I'm your host, Zach Boozy-Cruz, head of the Journey Alliance. All right, friends, without further ado, enjoy the show. Brad Steward didn't just ride snowboarding's first wave. He helped make it. As a teenage builder, rider, and organizer, he pushed the sport from outlawed to organized, working alongside Jake Burton and Tom Sims, lobbying the Forest Service when resorts said no, and helping pave the path that led to the sport being recognized by the Olympics. He co-founded one of the earliest snowboarding camps, where one day an 8-year-old named Shaun White showed up, years before the rest of the world would know his name. Then Brad jumped lanes into the Spike Jonze era of skate culture filmmaking, directing spots for Cartoon Network's Powerpuff Girls, Adult Swim, among other shows, and working to create ads for AMC and the NFL. He also shot music videos, shooting bands like Soundgarden and collaborating with UK labels. Today, his canvas is hospitality. Caravan Outpost in Ojai, California. A film set caliber, not glamping, hideaway, that's hosted everyone from The Bachelor to a steady stream of A-list celebrity regulars. Today on the show, I'm joined by Brad, snowboarding's earliest architect, director and producer, and co-founder of Caravan Outpost. In this episode, we cover how Brad helped move snowboarding from trespass to televised, how an 8-year-old Shaun White landed at his camp, how the Spike Jonze pipeline turned a DIY camera habit into gigs with Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, AMC, the NFL, and other major networks, why Caravan Outpost is production designed for memory making, not glamping, and how it became a magnet for celebrities, and so much more. Friends, you are absolutely going to love this wide-ranging conversation with Brad. He is one of the most impressive people I have had on the show. His story is absolutely amazing. Without further ado, get ready to meet Brad. All right, Brad, we are live, good sir. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much, Zach. I'm doing great. It's an absolutely gorgeous morning in Ojai, and I'm in my backyard, and I feel good about life today for sure. Thank you.
I was we were just talking about the fact that your backyard and it sounds like also your home has some hotel aesthetic to it, which I think is very fitting for the work that you do now anyways.
Yeah. We definitely have hotel energy here. People walk in the backyard and they're kind of like, wow, I feel like I might be hanging out here for a couple of days. And so we love that. We love just taking a few steps out the door and feeling like you're on holiday. And that's definitely what we try to do here at the house for sure.
Well, it's important, right? You never have to go on vacation because your backyard is the vacation, right?
Yeah, it's cost effective. Yes.
It is. Well, Brad, we have a ton to talk about today, and I am just absolutely thrilled and excited to have you on the show. You've done so many different things. I feel like you've lived like 1,000 different lives, and we got to catch up a couple weeks ago when we were talking about you coming on the show, And then since then, I also have been able to kind of conduct my own research, and it's really hard to put you in a box, man. I mean, you've just done everything from, produce, commercials for Cartoon Network to doing stuff with, MTV to a commercial for the NFL to launching a next generation hospitality brand. And really, we're just scratching the surface. We haven't even talked about snowboarding yet, which we will in a second here. And you're real sort of championing of that as a sport. So you've done so many different things, and I'm so excited to dive into all of them today. But I want to start actually, Brad, by asking you a question I like to ask folks who come on the show, which is, if
Yeah.
I were to crash a happy hour with you and the people that know you best, and if I were to ask them to tell me about Brad or tell me a story about Brad, is there a story that they might immediately tell me about
Oh,
you? And if so, what is that story?
yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. The real secret is I'm kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none, and I still haven't decided what I want to be when I grow up. So, um, it's interesting. Probably, actually, if I really think through it, probably what my friends would represent is I can be a little bit shy, actually, and they would maybe come to that cocktail party and say, "Hey, we're kind of surprised Brad's here. He flies a little under the radar every now and then," and then maybe after a drink or two, probably the story that would emerge would be something like outrunning an avalanche in Russia, which is a story that a lot of my friends ask me, "Hey man, tell me that one again, or tell me a little bit about that again." And I actually don't like talking about that too much because it wasn't really a positive experience, other than obviously, making it through. And so,
Jeez.
I think if anything, it kind of depends also on who I'm with. I know a lot of people from a lot of different places in the world, and I kind of pride myself on collecting, kind of interesting friends, and just trying to have a wide range of people that I socialize and work with, and so probably kind of depends on who's there a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very fitting answer given the research I've done on you, and again in our earlier conversations, you've got folks who are probably in the adventure sport sort of contingency. You've got folks who are in Hollywood and media. You've now got folks in the hotel world. I mean, and these are worlds that don't always overlap in everyday life. And so it sounds like you have done just a really interesting, a really good job, quite frankly, at curating not just great experiences, but great people along the way who you've been able to help dramatically. But then people that have also been able to help you, and we're going to dive into some of those stories today. Where I want to start, Brad, is understanding snowboarding, and what I mean by that in particular is
Yeah.
you said something on a call on our previous call in sort of passing. You're like, yeah, I was one of the earliest, snowboarders. I helped make it a sport. And then you kind of went on to something else. And I was like, wait a second. Like, can we go back to that for a moment? Like, what do you mean by that? And again, upon my research, uncovered that you were hugely influential in helping build what we know the sport to be today. Where does that story begin? Can you share that with us?
Whew, yeah. It begins with me at about 14 years old. I grew up in northern Arizona in the kind of Flagstaff, Sedona area, and I was a skateboarder, and totally into it. I'd always loved sports as a kid, but I'd never really found a team sport. Tried skateboarding one time, got going, fell in love with it, and really just was that skate kid. And well, I would argue I'm actually still that kid in some way today, but in Flagstaff it snowed quite a lot, and so winter would roll around. At around 14 years old, I'd be there with my skateboard, and I think, man, it's a huge bummer that we have to stop skateboarding in the winter. Every time it snows, we have to, we're done. And this is my main thing. Like, this is not a hobby or a part time thing for me. It's my identity. At
Mm.
14 years old, and so we lived in a house that had a really steep driveway. I kind of thought, seems like I could make a skateboard that I could just kind of stand up and slide down the driveway on. I'd stood up on my sled and and a couple of other things a time or two, and kind of thought, it could be kind of fun. But I really started to kind of get serious about it and think, well, actually, it seems like you could have something that would be kind of technical and kind of functional. So I just started making stuff and started going for it. And our driveway was very steep, and we would get a lot of snow. So I could slide down. Hey, this works if you put this little zigzag in the line or this little piece of side cut on the board. And so started making them. At 14, really dug it. At around 15, I worked at a skate shop. At around 15, I worked at a skate shop, and I learned that there was a guy, Jake Carpenter, who later went by Jake Burton. Learned that there was a guy, Jake Carpenter, who was making these things. And Jake and I connected, and he said, hey, I'd love to come and chat with you about snowboarding. And I said, well, I'm actually a kid, and my parents would freak out if a guy from Vermont, comes to my house and said, I don't have a place you can stay and hang out. I'm a kid, and my parents all the while are like, who are you talking? What is this thing you got going? What's it called? Is it ski boarding or snow surfing or, what is it? So very long story short, I became over the next few years, I became one of the better pro snowboarders in the world. A small little circuit of contests began to arise, and in general, in the early days, I was doing pretty good, winning a few, losing a few contests. It was all kind of daredevil stuff, just nothing heavy duty on tricks, just point it, and if you made it to the end of the run, you won, kind of thing. And it's like I joke to my kids, I was the 13th best snowboarder in the world at one time, and then I forget to tell them that there was only 15 people doing it, and the other two guys fell. And so I just started developing companies, snowboarding. I started pushing a little bit. Our local ski area wouldn't allow snowboards, so I went to the Forest Service office. Had an attorney, friend of the family, write him a letter, said, hey, we're actually open access laws allow us the right to use the mountains here. Had a lot of very serious meetings. Even as a kid at around 15 years old, we'd kind of, me and my buddies had kind of aggressively lobbied, the Forest Service to allow snowboarding. And I just kind of kept going from there. And that eventually led to a career starting companies and selling companies in snowboarding. Myself and Jake Burton later collaborated with a group called the Snow Sports Industries America to help bring snowboarding to the Olympics. We started many of the first governing bodies for the sport, which later were kind of taken over by FIS, which is the Fédération Internationale du Ski. And we ended up, actually, Jake and I and the SIA group, we actually ended up suing at one point the U.S. ski team and the FIS over getting snowboarding into the Olympics. They had a whole nother vision for it. It was going to be much more like ice skating. People wore uniforms and you did 10 tricks and that was it. And we said, no. There's a 20-year history of the sport that's a lot cooler, a lot more culturally informed. Things like music, your look and feel, and the tricks you do are expressions of who you are, and you can't take that out of snowboarding. And so we were successful in that lawsuit. We settled with them, which ended up starting the series of snowboard events that now, even today, actually lead to you becoming an Olympic athlete. So
wow.
A long fun history. Snowboarded everywhere in the world. When people, are like, "Hey, what islands have you been to?" I'm like, "Very few. Mountains, been to a lot." and so in the later years of my life, I now kind of get off on going to the sunny places instead of the snowy places.
Wow. I mean, that's so amazing. So you're there at the beginning. You're this kid with this dream. You're trying to solve a problem, which is you're tired of, or really you desire to keep skateboarding. You're tired of the snow that's interrupting the skateboarding, and so you figure out how to build a snowboard, and that leads you down this like fascinating career. So at what point do you realize? Like, when do you start seeing the momentum pick up, right? Because you're going from this is really, really, really niche to today, right? It's, I mean, it's I'm sure it's not actually equivalent, but like you hear people say, "Oh, do you ski or do you snowboard?" Right? Like that's the criteria today, and it sounds like not, relatively recently ago. You're not that old, Brad, right? Like relatively recently ago, no one knew what to call the thing, right? And so when did you, I guess, realize that, oh my gosh, we've created something that's gone truly mainstream. When did that realization sink in?
Yeah. I think there's a few moments, okay, and I'll kind of try to just give the timeline of the big moments that I think really changed my perception of it. My first moment was going back to 14 years old, 4916 Oakmont Drive in Flagstaff, my steep driveway. The very first time I slid down on my little homemade board, I thought that was fun. That was a blast. And I do kind of feel, and without sounding overly cryptic, I kind of thought, this is it. I
Mm,
got it. This is
mm.
lightning in a bottle. I know exactly what I am doing with my life. That was super fun. Build a run. Okay, now build a run with a jump. Okay, now take the jump. Now slam. Ouch, that hurts. Now make it. Oh, that's fun. That kind of progression. So that was a big moment in time for me. I think the second moment in time for me was kind of the first World Championships in Lake Tahoe that were held by kind of a mentor of mine, a guy named Tom Sims, who at that time had the largest snowboard company in the world and was kind of a rival with the Burton snowboard company. That was in Lake Tahoe in the 80s. I went there. There were something like 100 people that had entered the contest.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, there's people from Canada here and California, and okay, I'm not the only one. Up until that time, the only contest I'd ever been to was like me and six of my friends. And so getting there to the World Championships, that was held in Boreal up in Northern California. Um, Getting there was like, okay, there's kind of 100 or so people here. This is pretty cool. There's a little bit of a culture. Some people are calling it snow surfing. Some people are calling it ski boarding. Some people are calling it snowboarding. We don't know what it is yet, but we all know it's fun. Fast forward a bunch of years, I'm at the national championships. I'm on the Sims team and riding the pipe. There's a young kid named Shaun Palmer, 15 years old with a busted wrist. Shaun does a trick over my head called a method air. He does a method over my head as I'm walking on the side of the pipe coming back up for my run. And I'm probably 19 at that time, and I think that's it. My career's done. Here's a 15-year-old kid with a busted wrist doing a trick that I'm not that good at. And it's a really basic trick, but it was just never part of my trick bag. And he's doing the trick better than I am, and he's over my head. And I think it's over. I don't think I'm ever going to win a national championship. And so that was kind of like, okay, well, what do I do from here? I was just
Yeah.
starting into film school, and I thought, well, maybe with more people snowboarding, maybe there's something there. So that was kind of a moment. And then I would say, and I jumped into the industry, jumped in and kind of started the industry basically from there. And I would say probably the only other, two big moments that stand out. One was my wife and I were partners in a snowboard camp that has now since become a U.S. Olympic training center for half pipe ski and snowboard. And,
Wow.
and a kid named Shaun White showed up at 8 years old to go to camp with his parents. They dropped him off, and hey, we'd like to have him learn how to ride the pipe better, and stuff like that. And I remember seeing him and just how ahead of the curve he was at 8 years old, and I thought, well, hold on a minute, that kid's 8, and this is where snowboarding is today. Where will it be when he's like 20, 12 years from now? And seeing what he's doing at 8, maybe things are going to progress pretty radically. And then eventually, probably it all encapsulated at the Olympics when Jake, Burton, and I were standing in Nagano. I'd gone to the Olympics. They'd invited Jake and I to come over and kind of watch. And we saw a lot of stuff we liked, a lot of stuff we didn't like, but we knew, there's no stopping this train. And we had a minute where we basically just kind of looked at each other and we said, in some form, our work's kind of done, and our era has kind of finished, whether we want it to be or not. Manufacturers, people like Jake and I and Tom Sims and many other people in the industry, we'd kind of built this thing up. We paid the pros, we built the pipes, we bagged the ski areas, we gave the ski areas money to change designs and build snowboard parks. And we'd worked with a lot of associations to try to do everything we could to get snowboarding safe and on the mountain. And now here it was, as a massive consumer entertainment piece, not
Yeah.
just an activity. And he and I just kind of chatted, and it was like, wow, I wonder what happens from here. Where does it go from here? And we had some trepidation, and then I think we also had, just a ton of excitement and kind of a feeling of accomplishment, of like, wow, this is kind of a moment in time. We never really knew if we would be here or not.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And I was going to ask about Shaun White, so I'm glad that you inserted that story, because I was like, surely your paths must have crossed way before the rest of the world knew him as he's known today. That's fascinating. That's so freaking cool. So and then along the way, so you build these businesses, and then you get acquired by, you sell a couple businesses to like Adidas, Billabong, like Nixon watches. You guys do something with too at some point, like.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah, yeah. No, I was just gonna say that my question is like, so you start, obviously there's this, the consumer, and sort of the casual athlete, right? Is getting more and more interested and intrigued by this sport, that it becomes a professional sport. But on the business side, right? There's also this then recognition from the largest and most influential sports apparel brands, sports brands more generally, that sports gear brands, that, oh, this is something. And so are you like, in the same way that you're championing sort of the adoption of the sport by the general public, you're also building businesses that are being valued and assessed, and really become interesting to some of these larger sports players in the industry. Talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, because I don't, I was, um, I guess 15 or 16, when I started my first business. And so I, I, I was so young that I didn't really know what I was doing. And, as much as I was super crystal clear on this is my love, I love this sport, and this is going to be big, and I'm going to play a role here, I think, because I love it. I have to say, I always kind of viewed myself as working for snowboarding.
Mm,
And then kind of as a matter of convenience, I had a company and a brand behind that. But I always thought, really, what I'm working for snowboarding, and I have to just stay focused on doing the right thing and being authentic, and never, ever, ever compromising the integrity of the sport. And then as I got older, I did see that connection of, hey, if you just kind of do the right thing and work for the love of snowboarding, couple of things happen. Number one, never feels like you're going to work. Never
mm,
has ever a day in snowboarding. And number two is actually your business are going to grow because people feel it. They know when they're talking to the real thing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
they know rough edges and all. I think I've made every mistake in the snowboard business you could make, probably twice. But they know, hey, this is the real thing, and I had very specific metrics to me that were just radically different than you would ever have in a traditional business. One of my, what I would now call a KPI,
Yeah.
one of my KPIs was, can I go to Alaska, get in a helicopter with any of our team riders, any of our retailers, any of our distributors, anywhere in the world? Can I go there and be safe and perform and ride at a high level? I don't have to be the best guy because I'm not, but can I ride at a very high level in very extreme situations with people? Yeah, I could do
Wow.
that. And
Wow.
that was an important kind of performance indicator to me, that the company was staying kind of tied to the soul of everything, and the soul of what mattered in that sport and that lifestyle. I think what also, is just kind of a funny little thing of like, necessity was the mother of invention for so much of what I did. There was no equipment at any time. And actually, the first thing I made is, my dad happens to be a phenomenal sewer, and my
Mm,
dad and I made a snowboard bag because I needed to hide my snowboard in a bag to go to the ski area, to be able to get over to the trees, to sneak through the mountain, up the mountain, to pull the bag out of my or board out of my bag, put the bag onto my backpack, convert it to a backpack, ride down the mountain, to then have them usually stop me and say, okay, we're going to arrest you for trespassing if you do this again, over and over and over and over. And so, I kind of made that bag with my dad, and then I took it to a local bag maker, and she kind of made it. Then I started thinking, well, my bag works pretty good, but my clothes don't really work well. I want stuff that feels like streetwear for the snow. And I don't see that anywhere. I'm looking at all these skin tight red pants on the mountain, and that's not me, and that's not skate culture, and that's not my vibe. And so I think if there's probably one thing that significantly my first brand, Bonfire, did, I think that we actually invented the streetwear look for snowboarding. Our
Wow.
first product was a product called the fireman jacket. I literally went down to the fire station, took a photo of a fireman standing in a coat. He said, why do you need a fireman, or why do you need a picture of me in my fireman's coat? I said, well, I'm thinking about trying to make one. I didn't tell him it was for snowboarding, but we made a jacket called the fireman jacket. And it was
Wow.
this crazy configuration of a piece of streetwear that you would wear in downtown New York City, but it was waterproof and breathable and made for snowboarding. And we kind of knew it was a hit when one of the guys from Wu-Tang, I think Ghostface Killah, called us out of the blue and was like, "Can I get one of those jackets?" And we're like, "Oh, cool, Ghostface snowboards." He's like, "Ah, man, I don't snowboard. I just want your fashion. I just want the jacket." So that kind of helped. That kind of helped get things kicked off on the Bonfire brand quite a lot. And Bonfire eventually became the number 2 snowboard apparel brand in the world. Was acquired by Salomon. I sold it in my 20s to them when I was quite young,
Wow.
and then stayed with the brand. And then Adidas purchased it as part of the Salomon Group purchase, and so we became part of the Adidas family. And it was an exciting ride for sure.
Oh my gosh. It's just the way that you talk, Brad, too, is it's like you were pursuing what you just loved, right? Which was
Yeah,
snowboarding. You just
yeah,
loved the sport. And then because you loved it so passionately, you realized, okay, these are the problems I need to solve so that I can do this better, whether it's making a bag, a coat. And then these turn into their own businesses, and the timing of all of this, right? Of you discovering these challenges, these problems, these opportunities, acting
yeah,
on them just as culture is catching up and saying, "Oh, this is cool now. We want this." Right?
yeah,
Put you in this just remarkable position. So, luck is always a part of it for sure. But at the end of the day, you had the hustle and the wherewithal to really be a little prophetic in terms of this is where things are going. And being able to be kind of on the front lines in those very early days is remarkable. How does this all tie in? Because the whole other part of your, or maybe the next chapter of your career here is in media, right? You meet Spike
yeah,
Jonze, I think, at like a cocktail party or through some friends randomly. That kickstarts sort of this next career. You end up producing like Powerpuff Girl ads for Cartoon Network. You sell an ad to the NFL. Like, talk to us a little bit about how you parlayed your experience in snowboarding into media. Because at
yeah,
first
yeah,
at
yeah.
first glance, that doesn't seem to be an obvious next chapter in a career like yours.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is like, get ready for a heavy dose of 80s and 90s soup, cultural soup. Okay. Get ready for a big dose of that cultural soup. So it starts at a few places. Number one, as a kid, I'd always wanted to be a filmmaker, and I'd always enjoyed, photography, and had a dark room in our family's bathroom that I would, spontaneously set up every week or so. And my dad had really helped me kind of to learn and appreciate and understand photography. And so I became very interested in that. That really got parlayed, into my mom's side. My mom was a writer, and, constantly talking about storytelling around the house and so on. And books she was writing or working on, or things she was writing. And so I'd kind of landed in this place where, well, I want to be a filmmaker. And so I went to school at Brooks Institute in Montecito,
Mm,
very near Ojai, actually, where I live now. I'd gone to film school there, and then later completed my studies at Northern Arizona University, and in the communications department there. I was snowboarding all along that same time, one of the biggest problems I had getting out of college was every time it would snow, I would leave school and, and go snowboard for a few weeks, and that wasn't conducive to getting through school quickly. But I did get through, graduated, and thought, well, I'm gonna go make movies. So go back to that moment where Sean Palmer blows a method 2 feet over my head. Um, I come back to my snowboard sponsor and I say to them, hey guys, I think this is where I step off. I'm going to go, try to be a film director and work in the film world. And, as I'm leaving the office, one of the guys says, well, we can make snowboard movies. we make skate movies. We could make snowboard movies. And, would you come and work with us just for a little bit and maybe try that? So I was just kind of out of school and I thought, yeah, that sounds fun. Sure. Yeah, I could probably parlay that into something. And this is kind of where the cultural soup piece enters. So another mutual friend of mine was a guy named Andy Jenkins and another guy named Mark Luman. They were business partners with the guy named Spike Jonze, who was kind of shooting skate photography and directing some pretty clever little videos around the skate scene with some people. And they were like, hey, Spike's getting ready, we think, to explode. He's a real director. Forget the skate stuff. He's doing these music videos that are super hilarious, and he got all sorts of people interested in him. He dropped a video off in front of Fatboy Slim's hotel door the other day, and he opened the door, popped the video in, watched it, and it actually became the video. He loved it. It's on MTV today. I'm like, wow. MTV, that's crazy. And so, Spike's married Sofia Coppola. Oh my God, Francis Ford Coppola's daughter knows about skateboarding and snowboarding. That's crazy, and so I had just kind of gotten my feet wet in that and seen that, okay, people like Spike are able to kind of migrate from skateboarding into mainstream entertainment. Probably somebody can from snowboarding. There's a couple of million snowboarders now heading toward, snowboarding's peaked at around 12 million people a few years later. But, hey, there's a couple million people that snowboard. Maybe I could do something there. I've got a few friends in bands that I know, and I'm writing some comedy scripts and different things like that. And so that all kind of became like, hey, there's a cartoon called the Powerpuff Girls, and we'd like to associate them sort of with surf and snowboard and skate and everything. Hey, Brad, could you direct something for us? It's a brand new cartoon. Nobody really knows anything about it. Could you do something? Yeah, sure. I'll do Powerpuff Girls. Okay, great. Hey, those actually did so well. Could you work on Space Ghost? Yeah, sure. I love Space Ghost. Okay. Hey, that worked pretty well. We're thinking about starting a thing called Adult Swim. And we know you and one of the guys here has been playing around with this thing called Escalator Danger Squad. Could you produce Escalator Danger Squad for Cartoon Network and direct that? And actually, could you do 3 films for that? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Hey, the guy at Cartoon Network quit. He's now at AMC, and AMC needs 3 little movies, and one of them is going to be interviewing the person who is the animal communicator for Cher's cats. Would you do that movie? Could you do that? So I just kind of started doing that all along. I had a bunch of friends, and I was just kind of rolling with it. And I don't want to represent that Spike and I were best buddies or anything, but I definitely watched his career. I met with he and Rick Howard and his partners Megan in the skate business a couple of times, and I just seen like, hey, there's an avenue here. I'd written a couple of scripts and sent them to him, and he'd sent notes back, and hey man, I dig where you're at with these, and so a lot of encouragement. And so I just kind of started jumping into directing music videos. Sony in the UK said to me, hey, we've got a couple of bands. Can you come to England and shoot those bands? And, hey, while you're here, we've heard that you're a still photographer as well. We need some shots of Soundgarden for something we're doing on Soundgarden. Could you shoot Soundgarden? Well, yeah, actually, on the side, and all the while I still own my snowboard company and I'm still doing it. People are like, wait a minute, what do you actually do for work? And I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I travel the world and I have two bags, basically a camera bag and a snowboard bag. And, and I just kind of follow wherever those two bags go. And I had been shooting for the snowboard magazines all along and everything. But we'd had a friend who had kind of a part-time gig in a band called Sunny Day Real Estate, who'd also played part-time a little bit here and there in Nirvana and a couple of other things. And then I went to Sundance and met a buddy of mine there, a guy named Kevin Kerslake, and Kevin and I were chatting, and I said, well, what have you been up to lately? And he's like, man, it's the craziest thing. Friend of mine has this band up in Olympia called Nirvana, and they asked me to do a music video. It's all these cheerleaders that are in a gym, kind of like a punk rock theme, and it's called Smells Like Teen Spirit. And so I just finished shooting that, and it was really fun. And like, I kind of think these guys rock pretty hard and people might get into it. And then boom, these like Nirvana happens. And so and as I said, cautionary, I'm flagging that, that's 90s soup there. But, it was just kind of this time where everything was moving and growing and grooving, and people were just kind of doing what they feel. And it sounds maybe like a funny segue, but one of the things I'd always been interested in as a kid was kind of beatnik culture, and just kind of the life of these poets, artists, and musicians that kind of made their way through beatnik culture. And I was really fascinated by Kerouac and just some of the things that I'd seen with that whole culture and everything. And I kind of just looked at that time of like, man, this is my bohemian period. Like, I'm traveling the world. I'm sleeping on floors. I'm sleeping in great hotels. I'm meeting super famous people. I'm sitting in a hut in Russia in the middle of the woods, eating something with my fingers that I have no idea what it is. I'm just out there being who I can be for whatever moment I'm in. And my mantra was just, just find a way to get to the yes. Just fight like hell to get to the yes that the world is offering you. And when you have your own reluctance, when you're scared, because, the reality of a lot of this snowboarding stuff, it's scary shit, if you'll pardon my French. Like when you're standing at the top of Alaska and you've lost friends in avalanches and the helicopter takes off and there's a 400-foot drop, to your left, and somebody's telling you, don't go there. And you're only 2 feet away from there. And you see that, and you're with experts, you're with people who are highly advanced, who have another gear they've clicked into, and you get what we call in snowboarding sewing machine legs, where you're just shaking and your legs are just like this, and then you have to drop in. You can't stay there. There's nobody there for you. If you stay there, you have to go down. And just finding and fighting through the fear and the anxiety and the feelings you have of just saying yes, I'm dropping, yes, and that was a big part of my time. Hey, you want to come to England, shoot a band on a rooftop for a music video for the guys at Creation Records? Yeah, yes. Do you know anybody who can do? Do you have any experience? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I guess, yes. So that was a lot of that time, just fighting for the yes,
Wow. I mean, but that, I think, that's your specialty, right? It's so clear that no never really seemed like it fit or could fit, or maybe no was a temporary status, right? Whether it's, fighting to be able to snowboard down the mountain, right, without being arrested, right, for trespassing, or helping make the sport what it is today, observing, Shaun White before anyone knew his name. I mean, no is just not in your vocabulary, which I think like is a secret sauce. It's a superpower, quite frankly, for any entrepreneur, but especially entrepreneurs like yourself who've had so many different iterations of their innovation, like of their business prowess. How does this all end up, this is a show about where we talk to owners and operators of boutique hotels and independent lifestyle
Yeah.
hospitality
Yeah.
brands, right? Really cool next generation short-term rental retreats and whatnot. So how does all of this, right, channel, or I guess maybe a better question is, at what point in time did the idea of taking all of these experiences that you've had and channeling the creative energy that you garnered from them into building a hospitality brand, and not just an Airbnb in the woods, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
building Caravan
Yeah.
Outpost, right?
Yeah.
It's a celebrity spot. It's been on The Bachelor. It's been featured in lots of really cool, exciting places. What's the story there? And then in your own words, how does that connect to who Brad is, and or maybe who Brad became?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's deeper than I probably know. But in film, there's a concept that is the suspension of disbelief. It's the ability to have people get over the idea that they've seen something that may not be true, and it becomes true to them. And I believe, I guess the one thing I do have is I do have the ability to suspend the disbelief that there are things I can't do. I kind of feel like I can do anything, and I have um, maybe even a little bit of I don't know, maybe even a little bit of a kind of a childlike sense that even at the age I am now, 60, that like it's all fresh. It's all I can suspend my disbelief, and I can do these things that I dreamed of doing. And so um forget if I know anything about it, forget if I have the capital experience, the knowledge. And actually I'm at a point in my life where it's sort of like the farther the shot is, the more I want to take it. So
Mm.
there's kind of that snowboarder in me. I always tell my wife, don't forget that a lot of things make sense to me that might not make sense in the real world, because for a good portion of my life I made a living jumping off a cliff. And so that idea of rolling over the edge and into the unknown, whether it's business or the snow or the backcountry or a hotel, just I'm okay with rolling into the unknown. And that also means, by the way, you crash, and I have crashed, and it means you get over the edge and you find things that, wow, when I spot check that, and when I checked that landing 10 minutes ago, it looked clean. And now that I'm in the air and I'm heading toward it, there's a bomb hole that I'm going to land in, and my knees are going to explode and hit me in the face, and I'm going to bust every tooth in my mouth. Uh, figuratively and literally in the
And literally, yeah.
yeah. And so there's always that. So kind of the way this developed into hospitality, I have a theory in life that if you just look at the worst things that happened to you in your life in the right way, that actually they turn out to be the best things. And that's been a little bit of the history of my life. My dad, he was very supportive of me in snowboarding, but he would always say to me, okay, you should probably think about putting that thing away and getting, serious about college and getting a job, and I would always think, man, is this the worst thing, that I'm obsessed with this sport and that I love doing it, and or is it a bad thing, or a good thing? And so, what I kind of my pathway into hospitality began. I was working based in Geneva, had just relocated into Geneva from the U.S. and was working for Amer Sports. Amer became the owner of my snowboarding company, and I had kind of gone on where I was working as a vice president globally of them for digital in everything around apparel, and we were seeking to invent a number of things that are actually here today. And Amer is a large company. They're now, I believe, the number 3 sports company in the world. And they own many, many brands like Solomon, Arc'teryx, Wilson Sporting Goods, many, many sporting good brands that people would be familiar with.
Yeah.
And so I was headhunted. A private equity firm called me and said, "Hey, would you ever leave Geneva?" And I said, "Yeah, maybe. I've got a daughter in a private boarding school for high school in California." And they said, "Well, we're actually right down the road from that." And so I went to work for them. Took about a month or two for the whole process to happen. Came in from Geneva, sat down at my desk, and got the news that, well, the guy who hired you from the private equity firm is now gone, and everything's changed. and, and and all of the philosophy and everything that you and that guy had agreed on, well, actually we've moved him along, and we're going to do something different. And I was 50 at that time, I think, and I just kind of looked at it and I thought, well, maybe at 25, 30, I stay here and I go through this. But at 50, I'm actually, this looks like the worst thing that could possibly happen. My goal was, to be part of that company for a few years. And then the private equity firm had said, we'll move you into a private equity role with us. And I kind of thought, yeah, maybe I could bring some soul and a little different vibe to private equity. And so here I was, faced with kind of this radical decision, suddenly relocating from Geneva. And I said, you know what? I don't think I'm the leader for the kind of company that you're talking about. That's completely different thing. And so called my wife and said, hey, I think I'm going to not take this job, actually. And she said, okay, good to know, because we've just relocated our entire life. What do you have planned for us next? Or what shall we do next? And so it was a low moment. And we kind of just said, well, we talked to some friends of ours about Airstreams, and they were kind of cruising around doing a little bit of camping, and we'd always been engaged heavy duty in the outdoor world, of course. And so I kind of said, well, let's just buy an Airstream and go travel for a bit and just kind of figure it out. It's an unplanned break. Doesn't really seem like what we wanted to have happen, but let's just, try to fight our way to that yes and see if we can find something in this. And so, very long story short, we formed a group with our friends, and we got going on this idea. One of the ideas that I studied a lot at Amer was that true adventure people were kind of disappearing or becoming more elite. But what was happening is there was a large audience of people who, the way we'd kind of put it, wanted to kind of snack or sample the outdoors. And so we started the Outpost, to be something that happened right in your city, and that gave you kind of a camping like experience in your city. And we had tons of people call us who were like, hey, there's this thing that's happening. It's kind of called glamorous camping, and some people call it glamping. And you go out to Utah and you're in the middle of nowhere, and you stay in something that's kind of rustic, and on and on and on. And we kind of looked at that and said, actually, that's not at all who we are. We've been everywhere. We've stayed in tents. We worked in the outdoors. Salomon is I would argue, one of the leading outdoor brands in the world. Like, man, we've checked that box, colored it in, and crossed it out. Like, we don't want to do that. We want to do something that's really different and intriguing. And so that's kind of why we developed the Outpost. And a lot of times we still get calls for people who call and they say, yeah, we want to come and glamp, and we don't, really name check them on that. Great. Look forward to seeing you. Then they come and they stay a couple of days, and they're like, we've been glamping. This isn't at all like glamping. This is totally different. This is, we're surrounded by your clothing brand. First of all, Caravan Outpost. My wife and I at the core are kind of clothing people in a way, designers, my wife for sure. And so they're kind of like, this is like a brand. It's sort of like living in a brand a little bit. And so that's kind of what we tried to develop. And it is different than I think a lot of the kind of that glamping thing that you see out there, and glamping's fun. No harm, no foul on glamping. It just was never part of what we set out to do.
So I want to dive into this a little bit, because so Caravan Outpost, just give us a sense for where it is. And you talked about sort of like building something in the city.
Yeah.
How do you build a outdoor experience that feels like you're, in the woods, right? Or somewhere other than the city, while also being in the city? Help us understand how you were able to bring that to life.
Yeah. There's kind of that question, I believe every good business kind of starts with a really simple question, the strategic question. And so I think the question that we set out to answer is how do you architect experience? How do you architect what people experience? And we simplified that as we got through investment decks and kind of marketing and business plans and everything. And it really became down to like, hey, everybody wants a magic moment. And, and how could we kind of set the stage for a magic moment?
Mm,
We can't give you the magic moment. It has to be true and real to you. And that's going to be different for every individual. But could we set the stage? And to me, it was a straight line from snowboarding. I traveled millions of miles in hundreds of mountains chasing an intangible, and
yeah.
I never caught it. I I
Yeah.
I held it in my hand for a minute, but I never caught it. And I never, especially as you get older, you're like, I don't want to catch it. This little magic moment, it's going to be a moment, and I'm going to hang on to it, and I'm going to have it, and then I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to go to the next one. And so to me, that was a big part of the inception of the business. It was never, how do you make people feel like they're roughing it in a luxurious way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is kind of the strategic question behind glamping. For us, it was like, how do you get people to a fleeting moment that actually they'll be the only ones who know, and you'll actually never know if you delivered it, other than maybe you get a positive review and people say something special happened there. So that's
Yeah.
really where we began. So that became sort of, how do we take you out of your place? We looked at we didn't look at any other hotels, because at this time glamping wasn't really a thing, so there weren't glamping businesses to look at, and we didn't want to be that. There was nobody really to compare to, actually,
Mm,
and frankly, we didn't know enough, to know if there were people to compare. So we just began thinking about, well, really, what this is like is stage and theater. It's like film set design, and that's how we became to look at it. Is, could you build a stage and a theater that would allow people to have magic moments? That was the business question. And so the way we knew, I think we only really had, one indication, that it really worked, is when the guys came from the production company working on The Bachelor, they said, well, hey, we got to come out and scout a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance. Um, we've got set people, and they're going to come and do a bunch of stuff. We said, great, come up, come and we'll meet you. And I literally remember them arriving and the guy saying, well, after looking around, uh, we we actually don't have anything we need to do. This is a perfectly dressed set. So if you could show us where a couple of power lines could go, and where we can put craft services and the production, video village, if you can just show us where we can put that, we actually don't need to do anything. And actually, we do have a bunch of lights and some other stuff, but actually, the lights that you have on site are even better. And that's when I kind of knew, okay, we've created that kind of production, that production status, and so, and that's why I think, by the way, it's kind of an undercurrent. I think the reason a lot of celebrity clients feel comfortable at the Outpost is it's familiar in some way. They come on
Mm,
and it's sort of like, well, I'm sort of on a set, but I'm kind of on vacation. I'm not acting here. There's no play or performance or, anything. But, we've had so many of our really famous guests just say, I don't know what it is, but I just, I just feel something here. I feel I've been here, but I haven't. I don't feel I'm in a city in the middle of town. The Outpost is in the middle of Ojai. Ojai's a town, not a city, but it's in the middle of town. And a lot of them have said, I feel like I'm somewhere else, but I'm not. And that,
mm,
that weird little disconnect, also, I think, comes from snowboarding. There's a moment in snowboarding that happens between the transition of turns, where where you have been, where you are going, and to do it in the most efficient way actually requires you to float for a moment.
mm,
You're switching from one edge to the other edge, and you're required to float, and and you're in snow, but it's really water, but it's frozen water, and there's kind of this moment that's intangible. It'll never be there again. You'll never duplicate it, even on the next turn. You'll never float at that same time and place. And, not to get too ethereal with it, but I kind of looked at, at 50, I got off of one edge and I kind of floated to that other edge in that moment. And I made
Wow.
that next turn into hospitality. And
Wow.
that's kind of what that became for me,
I mean, it's in some ways it makes perfect sense, right? You now have a new stage, right, to play with, a new act to direct. You
Yeah.
you have right, you have the foundations, you've got the history, you know the methods, and now it's time to kind of play and change the game, if you will, like you did way back, when you were a 15-year-old. You were skateboarding and you needed to keep skateboarding, so you figured out how to snowboard. Little did you know at the time that you would have an everlasting impact on that industry.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
here you are
Yeah.
again, right,
No idea.
realizing, oh wow, the
Yeah.
way that people stay, the experiences that we crave, the kinds of escapes that we desire are changing. They have changed. How do we create those spaces, those moments that are, quite frankly, just like culturally relevant now? And then furthermore, how do we help bring awareness about this approach to experience to others? And that's got to be like a really fun canvas for you to start expressing and really sort of painting on. Uh,
Yeah.
is your mind, now that Caravan Outpost is up and running? It's been, you guys are several years in now. When did you guys launch again?
Yeah. Yeah. We're coming up on, let's think here. We're coming up on 10 years pretty soon.
10
Yeah.
years. Yeah. Okay. Like a decade, right? So
Yeah.
you're doing the whole experiential hospitality thing, which is certainly having a cultural moment right now. You guys are doing this before others
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
Knowing you a little bit now, based off of what you've shared with me, Brad, do, are you already kind of thinking about that next chapter? Are you thinking about expanding sort of the experience that you've built at Caravan Outpost? How do you wrestle with what I believe is probably, given your entrepreneurial background, a temptation at the very least, if not a sign at the very least,
Yeah.
that you got to get bigger, you got to grow, you got to do something more. How do you wrestle with that tension?
Yeah. Great question. I do. I wrestle it every day. um, well, let me explain a little bit of an orientation on a couple of things. So number one, I'm constantly trying to unlearn what I'm learning
Mm,
in
mm,
hospitality. Um, because I I believe that the word hospitality is actually super, super dangerous. Because then you begin to get, you kind of meta out on it of like, well, what is hospitality? Well, and I hear this in a lot of people I speak with, and in the hotel space. Well, it's kind of a series of amenities, and what you're offering, and so on and so on and so on. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what are the moments between those amenities? The amenities to me are table stakes. Everybody has those. So if
yeah.
you're looking for a point of difference on amenities, I guess eventually you do get to that place where you're like, hey, one of our amenities is eating, you know, chocolate covered ants, out on the plains of South Africa, and there's an audience for that, but you kind of get into this sort of out minuting each other in these things you're creating and so on. And then you go to those places and you meet those people and you see they're not really authentic to any of those things. And it's sort of like, this isn't the game we want to play, And so I think the question I'm always asking myself is, is there a place where we have an unfair advantage,
Mm,
where we know something or have experienced something or seen something that we can deliver? Um, and yeah, we're definitely thinking of next steps. How do you build 51% of an experience so that guests can fill in the other 49% and it becomes meaningful and real to them? So we're definitely, and when I say we, my wife and I, Shaun, we're definitely thinking really hard about what the next evolution of the outpost could look like. and where it's located, and kind of what are the feelings and what are the emotional connections that people have to that new location. A lot of our people are really emotionally tied into the outpost. We have dad and daughter groups who've been coming for like 7 years,
Wow.
celebrities who've been coming for many, many years. We're kind of an annual event for a lot of people, and in coming to our place. And so we're just trying to work with that. How do you make the intangible tangible? How do you build the place? How do you build the place for that? And I think the outpost is just one. It's just one execution. We never started out to be an Airstream campground. We thought, well, one iteration of this might have Airstreams, another iteration might have a totally different structure and be in a totally different location. So
And yeah, that was going to be my next question for you is whether Airstreams, when you guys got started 10 years ago, like they were all the rage, right? Like
yeah,
they
yeah,
were
yeah,
like the next coolest thing, right?
yeah,
And now,
yeah,
you've seen, as you've seen the industry evolve, you've seen, zillions of other unit types. Prefab is sort of all, big rage today for folks who are buying land and putting up these, mirror cabins or these really cool A-frames or
yeah,
domes or what have you. So,
yeah.
so it'll be interesting to kind of see how you guys decide to evolve, and maybe you stick with Airstreams and you guys are known as the coolest Airstream people in the world. Who knows? But right, it's got to also be fun to kind of see how things have evolved, and again to have the opportunity to, if you so decide, to go and create again something new and novel. I think that really does seem to be the through line for you is you're sort of like the new and novel person. Like you recognize things and you're able to execute on things just maybe as the wave is cresting of, oh, this could potentially maybe be something. That seems to be where you're able to execute the best, which is a very, very cool superpower. And quite frankly, not one that many have.
Yeah, no, it's funny because again, as I get older, I see some things and some things in my life that weren't immediately aware to me when I was going through them. But when I was a kid and I was skateboarding, I'd found this shoe company called Vans, and I'd worn Vans. I was the only kid in the school of, I don't know, 700 or 800 people that wore Vans. I got teased a lot. My hair wasn't like everybody else's. My clothes weren't like everybody else's. My shoes weren't anything that anybody wore at all. And, I was always kind of like um, an outsider, but I believe as a child, sort of an articulate outsider. My parents had really focused on making sure we knew how to read and communicate with people, and and that we were empathetic at a time where having that as a skill set in your children in the late 60s, early 70s wasn't necessarily something that people were talking a lot about. But I do credit my mom a lot for that. She I came from a family where there were 5 boys, and the
Wow.
focus on being empathetic was high, probably as a way of my mom maintaining her sanity. Um, but I think kind of how that translates to today. I'm always interested in how the people on the margins become the people in the middle. I'm really
Mm,
interested in that. Outdoors,
mm,
we used to often say at Solomon, we don't have the ability to compete with Nike on the track. We can't get on the soccer pitch with Adidas. We don't have the money or expertise. So really the only territory that's left for us is the outdoors. It's the only place where we can go where there's not hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of investment by competing sporting companies. We're just sort of left to wander in the mountains. And then you realize, wow, what a great place to be. What a powerful, fun place to be. And now outdoors hip, you go everywhere, and, you've got the Gorp core crowd and everything. And now it's hip, but it wasn't when we were doing it. It wasn't cool at all. It was, who's the granola guy running through the mountain, or, who's the guy who thinks he can, skateboard down a mountain, and it wasn't cool. It was, hey man, you're trespassing, get out of here, or
yeah.
we're gonna have you arrested. And so I'm always interested on how people from the margins move to the middle. that definitely happened in music. It happens in culture, my kind of that early fascination I had with beatniks and, what happened with them. A lot of that's really mainstream, today. And the things they were talking about are mainstream. And so, I guess that next idea in hospitality is kind of thinking about, well, how do you move somebody from the outside to the inside? What does it feel like to have a place that's built for you? I'm a consumer marketer in the end, I guess, or a consumer oriented person. And so I always feel that I'm thinking about, what does the customer think? What does the person who's here think? And this is why a lot of times I think people in the hospitality world are kind of disoriented when they call me, because they're like, hey, we have 25 acres. It's right outside of Moab. We got this prefab thing and we're going to put it up and it's going to be so cool and unique. And I always say to them, well, hang on a minute. Who's your who?
Yeah.
Who is the who? Who is it that comes there? How did they get there? How did they arrive? What was it that brought them to you? Great, you've got land, you've got prefabs. I crack Instagram and my feed is filled with beautiful stuff and really great buildings and really great land. But who's the who? And that's really, that's what I'm all about, and that's hopefully what the next chapter of the Outpost will be about, is, finding special people and doing special things on their behalf, and with their permission. I think a big thing is the customer has to give you permission actually to be part of that reality for them.
That was just absolutely beautiful. And I think a wonderful way to wrap, Brad. I love the way that you think. I am so impressed by the way that you act on how you think. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat and the opportunity to hear a little bit of your story. For folks who are tuning in, I'll have links in the show notes below to all things Brad. Of course, Caravan Outpost as well. But is there anywhere you'd want folks to connect with you specifically, Brad? Do you have a preferred social channel? Otherwise, I'll go ahead and just link everything in the show notes below.
Yeah, you can just link as you prefer. I fly a little under the radar. Back to your cocktail question. My time is my highest and most valuable resource, and I do everything I can to dedicate it to the people that I love and that love me. And so I don't spend a ton of time on social channels, but
you're better off for it. Trust me.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing the parade as it goes by, and then sometimes I feel I live in another city and I don't need.
Well, sir, thank you so much for the time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. Hey friends, thanks for joining us for this episode of Behind the Stays. I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram at Behind the Stays or send me an email at zach@journey.com. If this is your first time tuning in, it's a pleasure to have you and we hope to have you back again soon. But if you've been a listener for a while, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd subscribe to the show if you aren't already, and then leave us a rating and review of the show wherever you're streaming this podcast. Oh, and if you know a hotelier or a hospitality entrepreneur that's building something new and novel, I invite you to introduce them to me so that my team and I can discuss bringing them on the show. Again, you can just shoot me an email at zach@journey.com or a DM on Instagram. Behind the Scenes is brought to you by Journey, a next-generation loyalty program built for the modern traveler. We're looking to onboard new boutique hotels, unique stays, and the top vacation rental management companies onto our platform every day. If you're a hospitality entrepreneur who has a stay or a collection of stays with soul, we'd love for you to apply to join our alliance at journey.com/alliance. Again, that's journey.com/alliance. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will see you next time.